Hello and welcome to this special discussion on Budget 2021. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman presented probably the longest speech, 2 hours, 45 minutes. At the end of it, she herself was tired, and one of her colleagues sitting next to her, I think Home Minister, it was Rajnath Singh, who told her that you can say that the rest of the speech should be taken as read, and the budget speech actually ended quite abruptly. But after the budget presentation, what happened? The stock markets have crashed 1,000 points. The industry has not exactly expressed excitement, which is seen in the stock market reaction also. Uh, the opposition generally has said that it was a rambling budget, more of the same, no central vision or insight. So to get a feel of what exactly the opposition thinks of the budget, I have with me two guests. Rajiv Gowda, who is a member of Parliament from Congress. Rajiv has been director at the RBI. He was on the RBI board some years ago. He's also taught at the Indian Institute of Management. So we will have his views, very considered views. He also heads the Economic Research Cell of Congress. And we have with us Ghanshyam Tiwari, who is a Samajwadi Party leader. Ghanshyam is also an entrepreneur, understands business, and he has studied at Harvard. So we have two eminent guests. So Rajiv, I'll begin with you. What do you make of this budget?
It's a budget that's disconnected from India's reality. If you look at what the problems facing the country are, a collapse in consumption, collapse in private investment, a government that doesn't have funds to invest further, you have exports collapsing, you have tremendous distress, and there's nothing in this budget that would turn things around. So we should be panicking. It's, we are being polite by not calling it a recession. And yesterday's economic survey, everyone says, no, it's bottoming out. It's not bottoming out. We're sliding deeper into the abyss, and there's nothing in this budget that will arrest that slide or reverse it.
Are you surprised that there was no mention of either unemployment or farmers' distress, farmers' income doubling, or what have you?
Unemployment has been wished away. She said that the youth of our nation don't want to be job seekers anymore. They want to be job creators. So the burden is on them to go out and create the jobs. It's no longer the government's responsibility. There are certain measures which, if implemented, you will see, some amount of impact in terms of job creation. That said, look at this government's track record of implementation. Many of the programs that have been announced today have been announced in some other form in previous years. I mean, including rural infrastructure,
Like repackaging,
yeah.
some smart cities. Earlier it was 100, now it is 5.
100 smart cities were supposed to be, that was in the BJP manifesto, 100 new smart cities. Then they became 100 smart localities, and now it's down to we will create 5 new smart cities. But all these deadlines are so far into the future that they will have no reason, they won't be around in government to implement those. So it's really very disappointing in that sense that at a time when we wanted the finance minister to really pay attention to the drivers of economic growth and put in place the measures that would actually, revive sentiment, revive animal spirits, revive banks in the financial sector, we don't see anything of that significance at all.
So Ghanshyam, tell me, the economic survey yesterday spoke about trust. In fact, the central theme of the economic survey, as presented by the chief economic advisor Subramaniam, KV Subramaniam, was that we will rely on market principles and trust, market forces plus trust, as if trust was not there earlier, right? So there was such an emphasis on trust. Now, how do you see this phenomenon, the new emphasis on trust?
So I think the government likes to communicate what people like to hear. So in a market sentiment mode, they want to communicate that yes, we'll build trust, but the reality is that they have a track record of fudging data. They have a track record of holding back the bad news for their political benefits. Even in the budget, they demonstrate the same instinct when Nirmala Sitharaman, the finance minister, speaks about doubling the farmers' income by 2022. That's the biggest hoax lie playing out on the farmers. We are in 2020. There are no signals that we would reach there. The agriculture growth and allied sector growth rate is not there. They've been probably the worst performing government in terms of increasing the minimum support price given to the farmers.
Yeah.
They keep talking about improving the farm infrastructure. They have not.
And now they're talking about farmers generating solar power.
Solar
to
power
supplement
so,
their income.
again over there, if you want to communicate with trust, you would say that what percentage of farmers are going to get benefited. India has roughly 14 crore 15 crore farmers who are landed farmers, right? Of that, you are giving solar powered water pumps to maybe 15 lakh farmers. That's 1%. Do you think that will change the course in farm? In fact, this government has been criticized for offering benefits only to the landed farmers. There are another thrice the number of farm related people in villages who are also in rural distress, who also can power the economy through their consumption, for which this government has nothing to offer. They were part of informal sector. This government never took responsibility for the destruction it did to the informal sector. So coming back to the trust idea, when the Prime Minister
And lack of trust in GST, the way GST has been implemented.
exactly the way, so if the Prime Minister sits in a closed door meeting and the Finance Minister is not there and questions are asked, right? You build trust in a democracy. You build trust through transparency. You cannot build trust by being more opaque, by fudging numbers, and by being high-handed. You would not have to speak about trust if you would have industrialists like Mr. Bajaj speaking out openly, saying that this is what is wrong with the government. This is what the government has to fix. And when you don't do that, you can have all the meetings, you can have all the photographs you want, but you will see a budget that is being presented for 3 hours and Sensex that tanks by 1,000 points.
So, Rajiv, you want to say something about this trust factor?
No, trust is something.
Suddenly, as if it's some new phenomenon that needs to be.
It's a bit rich coming from this government because they have taken every measure to create an atmosphere of distrust. Our great statistical system, highly respected, is basically has lost its sheen because any set of data that they don't like, they will say we have data quality issues and throw them out. They've stopped collecting data on some of the problems that are really facing, like on suicides and farmer suicides. They refused to release that data until after the Maharashtra
The
election.
National Crime Research Bureau has stopped collecting disaggregated data on suicides.
Absolutely. But the other side of this also has to do with industry being very fearful of government because they've been misusing agencies like crazy. And what the word tax terrorism absolutely applies to this government. And in Karnataka, we had the tragedy of our Coffee Day founder committing suicide, and in his in his last note saying that he was hounded by the taxman.
So, what do you make of this one announcement that Nirmala Sitharaman made about putting it in statute that the tax guy will not harass you? I mean, how do you put in statute the act of harassment or non-harassment?
So that's typical of this government style. They will put something down on paper, they will do something entirely different somewhere else. Just like you can't trust these deficit numbers, right? Because, how has the government been able to even manage whatever numbers and targets that they're talking about? They have not been paying people who they owe money, whether it's infrastructure players, whether it's suppliers, whether it's companies, they have not been paying. They've
not been paying states for GST.
They have not been paying states for GST. They have not been releasing Manrega payments, which hurt the poorest of the poor who go for Manrega work, right? So this sort of thing, and they've been urging they've been ensuring that government departments don't spend. They've been borrowing money from LIC and ONGC and other Food Corporation of India. All these are well hidden.
1,90,000 crore from Food Corporation of India. Outstanding.
Outstanding. So where is this all going? So basically, there is clearly a lack of trust, and there's a great concern that people have across the board that we're just living with a bunch of slogans and nothing is there. There's no talent, there's no recognition, and that they're just going to divert attention to Hindu, Muslim, whatever they like to do.
So, by the way, you cannot these two things cannot coexist. That your primary political communication is on lies and fake news and propaganda, and you want the governance to breathe trust. The two cannot coexist because the people who are torchbearers of that communication are your ministers of state for finance. They are your home minister, right? And that is their success mantra in politics, right? And that success mantra will live in government, and that will become the reason for failure of your government, breaking of trust with any other stakeholder in economy.
True. So this is another point which I want to raise. This government seems to think that that on the political side, you can build whatever narrative that you want to, majoritarian narrative, and on the economics side, they, as you said, they think that they can build trust. So it's an interesting point that Ghanshyam is making. The two cannot be, compartmentalized, right, Rajiv?
In some ways, they could have if over the years they had actually managed the economy better.
Okay.
Then people would have said, our stomachs and our pockets are full, and possibly ignored the other agendas.
Okay.
But now people are asking, are you coming up with those agendas to divert attention from the crises in the economy? That's one part. But the other is, they have learned the fine art of wasting mandates. Modi's first mandate, he blew on demonetization, and now his second mandate, he is blowing on decitizenization. He's basically taking a country that is in distress, actually needs tremendous revival, and instead, diverting all our attention to, these extremely divisive and disruptive agendas.
There's another, Rajiv, another trend which I've been watching very carefully over the last 4-5 years. The GDP has been dropping consistently. That everybody knows, right? So we are at a low of 4.8%.
4.5, right?
Yeah, 4.5% from 8.2 last year, first quarter of last year. So therefore, the revenues are dropping. So the first real truths that they've spoken in this budget is that the revised estimates showing 3 lakh crore less revenue than the budgeted estimate, which is something which they didn't, they lied about it last year. If you remember the Piyush Goyal budget, the revised estimates did not reveal
there was a huge
1,70,000 crore. So now they're showing a 3 lakh crore. So I think,
and that must be an underestimate also.
it must could be an underestimate. But how are they then making up, balancing the budget and not letting fiscal deficit or letting fiscal deficit maybe relax by just about 0.5%? Now, I get the sense from the budget documents that under the capital receipts, there's a 2 lakh crore receipts that they're budgeted for, which is doubling of the capital receipts. That is divestment. I think LIC is part of this. Are you worried about this move for the first time since independence to divest LIC shares? Because LIC is something that people in this country have so much faith in. People think that LIC will never collapse.
Yeah.
No, what do you think about this LIC?
We have to study it in much more detail, but we are really concerned that in the hands of this government, no institution is safe. And they will do this panic privatization, they will, out of desperation, sell the family silver, as it were. And LIC, as you said, it rests on public, that faith.
It's an article of faith.
That even after death, they will be there to take care of their obligations and things like that. And LIC is also an instrument for investment. It's not just insurance, right?
Yeah, sure.
It's a more complicated arrangement. And it's always been backed by, tremendous stability. Well, this government has got LIC to buy a whole bunch of other companies which they claim to have privatized. LIC also has tremendous NPAs emerging because of the way it plays in the market.
All their investments over the last 5 years.
Exactly. And now they're going to, but this may be the only way they're going to be able to raise money.
That's what I'm coming to.
Anywhere close to to attaining their deficit targets. They're not going to reach them at all because the other privatizations have been a tremendous failure.
So Ghanshyam, again coming to LIC, I get the sense that in the last 5 years they have taken money, they've made other PSUs, good PSUs, rich PSUs, profitable PSUs borrow on behalf of the government. The government has not borrowed directly, but in the budget document they say, government is underwriting their borrowings and government is using their borrowings. So ONGC, all these companies, IOC, what have you, NBC, they've all borrowed up to the hilt on behalf of the government. Is it they're shifting to LIC? Do you think because they've exhausted all the space there were in other PSUs to borrow?
That's one aspect of it, and that is very visible. But I think a more underbelly of this is that you remember there was a letter written by a number of professors, Nobel laureate, about how data is being fudged, and that is not good for India and it's our global standing.
Yeah.
In response, a number of chartered accountants had written to a response to it.
Yeah, I remember
right?
that. Yeah.
Right. So as you look at all these jugglery with numbers, right, it almost appears as if, and somebody commented on the way economic survey was written. Wikipedia getting into economic survey, etc. It seems like it is the chartered accountants who are running the government, and what they really need are economists, right? But when you say Nobel laureate Abhijit Banerjee, you would say that his political colors are known, and you would disrespect him. So you would have the same level of disrespect for Amartya Sen. You will say Howard versus hard work. You will not respect Dr. Manmohan Singh. You have basically taken what is the strength of India. India is known by its top economists who can give a vision for how to gradually take the country forward. Right? You have neutralized that strength, and you have put in probably chartered accountants who can do this number jugglery, so that on a PowerPoint, probably to the Prime Minister or to the Finance Minister, things look rosy, but it will always look like a makeshift arrangement.
Yeah.
So what they are doing with what they did with ONGC, what they are doing with LIC is a makeshift arrangement. What they don't want people to know is they've been a total failure when it comes to Air India. When they could not divest running enterprises, right? Then they are going towards enterprises that are probably the most glorious enterprises built within India, that have the highest level of public trust.
Yeah.
Right, and that play a strategic role in the growth and large-scale capital expenditure for the country.
Yeah.
That's a very good point.
Yeah,
Where we don't have good development finance institutions
Yeah.
to finance infrastructure, and LIC is one of the entities that actually provides the kind of financing.
The long-term
that's required.
financing, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell me, I want to now shift to there was one announcement which I was anticipating, but I didn't hear anything in the budget about that, which is, Rajiv, if you remember, just 2-3 weeks ago, Nirmala Sitharaman herself, or maybe a month ago, she announced this mega mission of the government to build infrastructure projects worth 102 lakh crore. Now, one was expecting some sort of roadmap for that in this budget, but there's nothing about that. Were you surprised?
I have a term for that. It's called the National Infrastructure Pipeline. That's what she calls it. I call it the National Infrastructure Pipe Dream. Okay, because actually, if you look at it, it's not even coming from government. Government will put a certain amount,
Yeah.
and then there's industry is supposed to cough up some more.
33% government, 33%, yeah.
The ratios may vary.
30%, and then private
and
sector.
then foreign investment should cover the rest. So, where does the government have the money for that kind of an infrastructure push?
Yeah.
At this moment, it does not have. So that's why it seems like, many of those are also already announced projects, things like that, all put together to sound like 100 lakh crores. To just so that's the problem. That emphasis on optics, the emphasis on spin is taking away their attention from what needs to actually be done. On the other hand, there's one opening in this budget, which is the tax break given to sovereign funds,
Yeah,
right?
okay.
To come in if they come into infrastructure. So that could potentially allow for some of that foreign money to come in, because the reality is, and this is if you look at companies, if you look at countries elsewhere, their growth rates are much lower than ours. So it does make sense for if they have the risk appetite, for some of these sovereign funds to come into India,
Yeah.
where they would get risk-adjusted marginal rates higher than possibly elsewhere. But for that, you also need a country that's at peace. You also need a government that can implement projects. You don't need tax terrorism of various kinds. So it's not clear that we'll have to wait a year and see whether anything actually comes in.
So we again come back to the same theme of social stability, link between social stability and economic growth, right? Which even Raghuram Rajan and others are talking about.
Even in that theme, they are not honest about it. You want to play Hindu-Muslim agenda every day from top to bottom, right? And you would even lie at a prime minister level, the way prime minister lied on NRC, to sustain that agenda. That's picture one. Picture two is you want to make, say, Saudi Aramco, which is Saudi Arabia, right? Which is a top Muslim nation. You want them to be the biggest investor in your country,
Okay.
right? So if you are at one end, you are doing Hindu-Muslim, right? And you want a Muslim nation to be a top investor in your country. The two doesn't add up. So that's what I'm saying, that they have gotten away far too long by telling their big bold lies, right? And their supporters have gotten carried away with that, so that no one looks at the reality. The reality is Mr. Modi does not know how to create jobs, and his cabinet doesn't want to speak about it. The finance minister spoke that, yes, we have to do something about unemployment, but the entire budget is bereft of any details of what is she doing about unemployment. There are big opportunities in this country today because of connectivity. They are talking about BharatNet to dramatically reduce the budget of education, and still the expense on education, not the budget, expense on education, and still provide high quality education for everybody, right? They don't want to tap that. State by state, eventually India is not just a central government, it's states, right? State by state, you would have diabolical governments. You have the largest state in India, Uttar Pradesh, where the entire government is diabolical. The Chief Minister says, "Thok do." No one can talk to that man for 5 minutes on development, on an agenda of investment. When you put that kind of leadership in the states, right, how will you move the wheels of progress in a rapid action format? Even if you had presented a golden budget, the best set of ideas backed by money, you don't have the capability in your state system because of your politics, right, to move the ball forward.
Yeah. So Rajiv, coming back to some of the welfare schemes that Prime Minister Modi has been running under his name, right? So he came up with a slew of welfare schemes: Pradhan Mantri, Ayushman Yojana, Pradhan Mantri, low cost housing scheme, Ujjwala scheme. Now, if you put the allocation for all these together, I mean, they would run into several lakh crores, and on top of that, they've in this budget they've announced a 3 lakh crore worth of program on drinking water, tap water for the people. Now, Raji, I want to ask you this: in a scenario of declining GDP, declining revenues, and by how much, like 3 lakh crore, where will the money come from to run these welfare schemes? Is that doesn't that sound daunting to you?
So this is why the implementation doesn't match the announcement. And you find delays, you find many of them actually not working out the way they're supposed to. The the LPG, that freed up a lot of women from having to secure firewood and things like that. Well, after the first cylinder, a large number of them didn't go for a second cylinder because it was costlier. The price has been increased over the last few years, and so it becomes more unaffordable. Many other programs, the Ayushman Bharat, for example, that requires private hospitals to participate. A large number of them are actually dropping out because the government refuses to compensate them at even a level that would cover the costs. So there are a lot of them that are actually dropping out. So these are all disappointing, frankly. And even in the Kisan Saman Yojana, you find that not everyone is covered. And
there are reports that at least 30-40% are not covered.
And payments are not going in time. And in any case, it was a limited program because, as Ghanshyam pointed out, it only went to landowners when the vast majority of rural India is landless, labor, and tenant farmers and people like that, sharecroppers. So it was a limited vision. It was aimed at countering the Congress's Nyay, that we had sort of offered, and it was snuck in at the last moment into the pre-election budget. But each of these are huge drains on the government if the government doesn't have the money. And the way the economy is going, with nominal GDP drops, taxation is based on nominal.
This year is 7.5% nominal. It's a 15-year low.
Yeah.
In the current year,
when
fiscal year.
No, and this is during a period when you've had benign crude oil prices.
Yeah.
So there's no excuse for being in this terrible situation. So fundamentally, when nominal GDP prices fall, GDP growth falls, you have less taxation that would come into your coffers. So because and so even the number that she's thrown out today, which is 10% over the next year, so how much of that is going to be the inflation component? How much is actual real GDP growth? That's left to our imagination. But looks like what I would predict, I would say it's going to be about 3.5 or so real growth, which is terrible for our economy and given our fundamentals, and probably 7% or 6.5% of inflation, which is much higher than all those bands the Monetary Policy Committee is trying to deal with, and certainly more than what this government's been boasting about for years. Because the deficits will have to be financed, will have those kinds of inflationary impacts.
So, Ghanshyam, I'd like you to say something on another emerging area of conflict, which is this government, as you said, center projecting all kinds of grand schemes without the money, under many of them under Prime Minister Modi's name. And I am told by the bureaucrats of several state governments that they are being forced now to take a large part of the burden. They are being forced to borrow from the market for Prime Minister's low-cost housing program, Ayushman Bharat. So where do you see the center state now? Increasingly, BJP is losing, state after state. So you have opposition governments in a large number of states, right? So where do you see this tension playing out? Or how do you see this tension playing out?
Well, I'm relatively young in politics, but one great phase that I've seen as a student of politics is the UPA 1, right? And all these great chief ministers for various states emerged under the leadership of Dr. Manmohan Singh, be it Mr. Narendra Modi, Mr. Nitish Kumar. During UPA 1, you ask anyone that name 3 great chief ministers of India, you'll get 5 names. Right? Today, if you ask anybody name 3 great chief ministers of India, you don't know what names will come up. So the reason was that you had a prime minister who would enable resources to the center, and who was able to collaborate without a sense of with the state, and who would enable an environment where he can collaborate without insecurity.
Again, there's a question of trust.
Without insecurity. Now you are pushing all this burden to the state. Planning commission is dismantled. There's no equivalent planning body that most states have. So the state planning ability is limited. Public finance ability within the state is also limited, moves from state to state. The politics that BJP has played also creates tensions within the state. So you have to allocate a certain amount of resources and state governance to just check that kind of politics, where you don't want hatred to run the course of governance, right? So it is one environment is that the states are forced to take the politics that is emerging from BJP and is affecting them. Second, they operate with resources that are volatile given the way center operates. Third, they are forced to take the vision of the prime minister. If there is a non-BJP government, why would it take the vision of the prime minister who doesn't even build a relationship, a rapport with the state? So in this environment, as I said, it fractures the growth curve of India. Not just because we may not have as much money or tax collections are not as high or the sentiments are not high. It's just that we can't get our center state to move together on missions that are important for the country.
Yeah. So finally, Rajiv, I would want both of you to respond to this. Another important event happened today which went unnoticed. The 15th Finance Commission report was presented in Parliament. There is, again, coming back to center state, there's a lot of anxiety about what the 15th Finance Commission is going to do in terms of transfer to states from the center. Now, there are news reports that the 14th Finance Commission had increased the transfer to states of the pool of taxes to 42%. Now, there's a lot of speculation that it will be reduced this time, and more worrying to the states is also the fact that a new unknown factor has been introduced in the Finance Commission, which a lot of people say is illegal or not, definitely not ethical, which is in the name of national security and defense. The center is trying to appropriate part of the pool before distributing the money to the states. Before sharing, there is an attempt to appropriate a good part of the pool for so-called national security and defense. So what do you make of this?
See, this is more complicated, and I can't give you a party position on this because I will give you a position as a representative of the state of Karnataka,
Yeah.
right? And our southern states, for example, and are concerned that our performance on multiple criteria, or developmental criteria over the years have been very good. As a result, our population growth has slowed down, things like that. And if this commission is going to base resource allocation on population figures, then all
which
of us...
Which also they do.
Yeah. Then, they're potentially upsetting the balance.
Yeah.
In some
2011
ways.
base they're using, right? Population base.
They may use 2011, they may use the next one, I don't know.
Yeah.
But historically, we would prefer it to be the 1971 census. And so there's this great concern about north-south, what would actually... we see these are again divisions that we don't need in this country. And we need a method of bringing people together. In the early Modi days, government days, Mr. Jaitley, managed to pull that off on the GST front. Actually created the GST Council and pretty much ran it in a consensual manner. But we don't see that emerging afterwards. So again, here is this report that's tabled without sufficient consultations, right? So we don't know enough of what's in there. We've not been able to react or suggest. So what do you do? So this is a recipe for backlash. Yeah.
So finally, just both of you in 30 seconds or maybe more than that, what advice would you give this government after this budget? What would you say what do you tell this government to do in order to sort of retrieve the situation from what appears to be a pretty hopeless situation, right? What would you say, Ghanshyam?
I would say that the one thing this government can do is try to become invisible for a year, right? This in your face every day, Modi ji giving speech, his pictures everywhere, and is basically a symbol of non-performance. And that builds a propaganda because you want to tell everybody that I am performing, but the reality is you're not performing. So if you are invisible, probably some of these auto sector just articulating as trust will go away, and people will figure out ways. Eventually, even the government is saying that the weakest link in society, today the weakest link of society is a youth who doesn't have job, comes from a zero asset family, has a broken education, and you are telling in parliament that I see this youth as a job creator. You are playing a cruel joke on that youth.
Yeah, turning everybody into an imaginary entrepreneur.
Exactly. So I'm saying that you don't want if you really want to bring development led by people, then you cannot have a narrative that is dictated by Amit Shah, where the star cast is Sadhvi Pragya, where the star cast is Yogi Adityanath, where the star cast is Anurag Thakur. This narrative will not take the country towards development. It will not even take us to a conversation on development.
Rajiv, what would you tell?
Well, I would say
Sitaraman?
I would say just face up to the truth. Satyameva Jayate, right? If you confront the truth, if you stop believing and cooking up lies, then you will actually possibly find a pathway out of the mess that we're in. But instead, we see continuous... You saw that in the economic survey yesterday. You saw that in her speech today. Targets and numbers which have no connection to the actual reality. So all I can say is next year you will see Sahitya Academy Awards. Prize for fiction goes to Nirmala Sitharaman for her budget.
Thank you, Rajiv. Thanks, Ghanshyam, for talking to us. So that's what the opposition thinks of the 2021 budget and its impact on the economy. Thank you.